Um, really, like, what the whole purpose of this presentation was, just to bring some awareness about what bullying looks like in today's day and age, what our kids, what our youth are really dealing with and experiencing, and how to address it, how to address bullying at home, how to give parents like the tools and techniques, and strategies to deal with these situations as they come up. Kind of just giving you guys some tools to empowering you guys to have better relationships with your kids, and address like bullying as it comes up. uh I just have a couple of ground rules. Like, we do have a few discussion questions throughout the presentation. We would love if you guys could put your answers for the discussion in the chat, and then during the Q&A, we'll you guys have the chance to unmute yourselves and ask whatever questions are you have for us. But for the discussions, let's keep things in the chat. And that, yeah, we'll play it by ear. We're excited to be presenting with you guys today. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Okay, did that work?
Yeah. All right. All right, so just to kind of get some things started, our first discussion question would actually be pretty basic. If you guys can use the chat, we would love to know what you guys understand bullying to be. And do you guys know if there are different types of bullying? And what are the most common forms of bullying? And we'll get right into it after we've seen some responses. And of course, I'll read out loud some as well. So feel free to kind of throw them into the chat. I'll read them out loud. Yep, so I'm seeing some responses. So we've seen a mention of emotional and or physical intimidation, unwanted aggressive behaviors directed towards others, repeated intentional negative actions against another to cause harm. You guys pretty much hit the ballpark there. Making someone else feel uncomfortable over a long period of time. Yeah. So it sounds like, again, like we all have pretty much like a good understanding of what bullying is, and you guys have listed out pretty much like different types already. So unwanted aggressive behaviors, it could be verbal, it could be nonverbal as well, so physical, emotional and physical, again, different types. But again, like when we look at form of bullying, like what you guys have all said, bullying is a form of aggression where, that comes with a power imbalance. So power is being used and abused as a form of way to kind of gain control over the other person. It is a type of behavior that can make the individual who is being bullied feel alone, afraid, uncomfortable, and all that. So making them feel very inferior. And like you all have mentioned, there are different types of bullying, and the ones you guys have listed: physical, emotional, mental, sexual, and neglect. Like perfect, like that's what we have on the list as well. And we wanted to also highlight cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is now becoming one of the most common forms of bullying, just with the rise of technology and how advanced it is becoming and different social media platforms. It is one of the most common forms of bullying, and we'll touch up on that topic a bit more in the future slides. But then moving on to the next one. We're going to start talking about the bullying cycle. So when does it all start? So here on the slides, I've kind of put them out on kind of like bullet points and stuff for us to read. But I think like the most important thing is for us all to understand that it is all part of our responsibilities as adults, caregivers, or even professionals in the child's life to really take care of them and to really like focus on the aspect of like when does bullying begin, so that we don't turn a blind eye to those behaviors even though they're so subtle, because again, when they get older it can turn into something bigger. um, Essentially, when we have done a little bit of research as well, according to even our own Canada's government website, they have indicated that bullying can actually start as early as 4 years old. So that means at 4 years old, the child can have the potential to become the bully or the person being bullied, and both, of course. And if the cycle of bullying continues without any adult interventions, it will continue to have a lot of long lasting effects. And it's going to, again, like, not be very, very good for them. I can give you guys an example as well. So, when we let the child grow to the age of 11, again, this is where the child is forming their social identities through their interactions at school, socializing with their after school engagements, such as sports teams, clubs, and even extracurricular activities. And of course, even their interactions at home with other siblings, relatives, and other family members. Those interactions plays a huge role in how they form their identities, and that in itself can play into bullying or the kid becoming bullied. We also need to recognize that as the child gets older, the type and the range of bullying behaviors can actually increase. So, for example, we want to highlight that bullying itself can look very different when they're in elementary. So, there's going to be a lot of name calling, name teasing, maybe some pushing, shoving, maybe some cultural parts can tie into it. But we know as the kids do grow older, they have access to tools like technology, and they may have more access to social media. So bullying can look very different compared to the elementary age when you're in middle school or high school. And we want to highlight that bullying is not a normal part of growing up. So it is part of our role as adults, no matter who you are, that we got to intervene and support them with where they're at.
So just moving on a little bit, we've talked about, like, as kids get older, like as they become teenagers, they're starting to use more technology, right? And so a big part of understanding bullying is understanding the impact that technology has in today's world. um, we know that bullying typically, when before the internet, bullying is something that would often happen when there's less adult supervision. It would happen at the park or in the stairway, in the washrooms, right? But with technology and the impact, I guess, like with how accessible technology is, we're starting to find that bullying is kind of everywhere now. Like we can find people insulting each other or saying hurtful things to one another a lot more. It's a lot more frequent, and it's a lot harder to get away from, right? Like the digital world has expanded so much, it has made bullying more pervasive in people's lives. There was always a chance that when you got home from school, maybe, or you went to your after school program, maybe your bully wasn't there and you were going to have a great rest of your day. But with technology and I guess the influence of social media, those are things that are kind of harder to control, harder to get away from. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's also a little bit harder to monitor technology, and a young person is use of technology, what they're doing online all the time. And so, there is a lot less supervision in those spaces. And you know that's part of what we want to be able to address with you guys today. Um,
And so for just to kind of touch base like on what Cindis has talked about, like moving into like cyberbullying itself. And cyberbullying is described as the use of computers, smartphones, and any other connected devices that are electronic that can be used as a tool to tarnish the victim's reputation or to sabotage opportunities. And really like the mindset that comes with this is we want to embarrass, we want to hurt, mock, and threaten, or just be mean to that person online. And we do see a lot of similarities, of course, between cyberbullying and bullying that happens in real life, like physically. But there is to be said that there are a lot of significant differences as well, given the fact that with cyberbullying, the bully typically will be granted anonymity, so we won't know who they are, right? Another big thing is because they are, again, tarnishing another person's reputation, we cannot see that victims' emotional responses. So it kind of just shuts them down, like you can't see what they're doing to them. So it's just easier to bully from that stance. You also have a larger audience. You can target a lot of different people on the receiving end. You can use Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, any type of social media. And I think with the rise of how advanced our technology is these days, it's so easy for us to take a screenshot, for us to share links, to do a retweet, a repost of that post. So it can pretty much spread like pretty quick. And just given the fact that, of course, depending on what type of cyberbullying the person is engaging in, like there's a lot, we wanted to highlight one of the most common forms of it, especially when the kiddos do get a lot older, where they do have access to electronics, is sharing intimate images or videos of a person without consent. We wanted to touch base on this because nowadays the kids, they have their own slangs, their own words. So the likelihood of them sharing nudes, so just sexual images, sharing sexting messages, so sexual messages that are being exchanged between two people, or maybe exchanging sex tapes, so video recording of sexual activities. And of course, like the sex tape itself can be made between two consenting individuals, but at times there could be an individual within that relationship that may be using it for inappropriate uses, maybe use of revenge breakups, just as a form of manipulation. And we wanted to shed light on this topic because, again, many adolescents who are growing up, they may participate in these activities. I'm not saying they all do, but it's just essentially really important to kind of remember this piece that they're still young, they're all kids, and they're growing up and they're experiencing dating and getting to know what a relationship is like. But we oftentimes need to know that sometimes when these very intimate things do get done, we need to understand that they shouldn't be sharing intimate images without consent because it is part of the Canada's criminal code. And the criminal code is there to protect everybody's privacy, not just for anybody under the age of 18. So just kind of keeping that piece in mind. So things can be done legally if a person does engage in sharing intimate images without consent.
And when we're giving you all this information about bullying and the types of bullying and how easy it is to be bullied in today's world with all the rise of technology and cyberbullying, right? I think a lot of parents, a normal response might be like, how do I monitor my child more closely? How do I put more restrictions? How do I make sure that I see everything that they're doing online? And like some of those boundaries, like, at certain points, like, do have to be enforced. But instead of asking, like, how do I guess, be more, like, how do I monitor my child more? It's more what we really need to be asking, what we really recommend parents to shift their focus to thinking is, how do I support my child to feel safe and supported when they do tell me about bullies or when they do tell me that something happened online, right? How do I address this as a parent? So instead of not intentionally, but like by monitoring your kid more closely, especially as an adolescent, you're kind of putting a barrier in between your guys' relationship, and what that might accidentally end up causing is some secrecy. So, and them not telling you what's going on or what they're going through, right? What you really want to do is you want to promote collaboration. You want to promote working with your child, building a positive relationship. You are the role model. You are your child's like best advocate. You don't want to push them to a position where they feel like they can't share what's going on in their lives with you as a parent, right? And so what our presentation hopefully is going to really focus on is kind of how to support you guys as parents into shifting your mindset from how do I monitor this, how do I control this, to how do I address this positively. Um,
And to kind of start off, we wanted to kind of share some of the common trends that we've been seeing here at our clinic when we do work with families. And we do get quite a, a lot of trends of like, parents coming in to get support because they did find out or about to find out that something is going on with their kids, or their kids are having some sort of situation that's happening at school, but they just don't know what it is. And typically what we always hear from parents, it seems to be these types of warning signs. So um, parents will tell me oftentimes like my kid's refusing to go to school, like there's no reason, or the reason that's being provided just doesn't logically make sense. Sometimes the kids do end up going to school, but they'll end up skipping classes, so them not showing up to like science class or math class, or maybe like a particular class. They show up to every single class but that one class. um, they see trends of like their kids won't tell them what's going on, just kind of giving them the cold shoulder, saying things like, don't worry about it, I'm good. Just, comments to like, in a way, not wanting their parents to worry. They've also, so I've heard from parents that their kids do withdraw. So, meaning that like sometimes their kids, you have those off days where you don't want to talk to anybody. That's pretty normal. Like coming from school, like after school, you're tired, but it does become a problem when your kid is very energetic, very hyperactive, or very talkative, yet suddenly there's a huge drastic change in how they talk to maybe their family members or close siblings or a close friend. There could be some signs where we have had parents sometimes who even reach out to us saying, hey, we've heard of your clinic. The school actually recommended us to come to you because there's been some things going on and we just don't know what to do and we don't even know what's going on. But we think a counselor could benefit, or my kids could benefit from talking to a counselor. Um, Noticing as well trends and even signs of like kids not wanting to socialize anymore with like the friends that they've made at school. No more hangouts, no more initiating any more hangouts. They don't ask for sleepovers. And the biggest one we've always heard from parents, 100%, usually like 99.9% of the time, is the kids are spending a lot of time online. They'll say things like, my kids, like, so they would have unstructured sleep time. They would sleep all day, but then spend all night on their computers and they're connecting online, probably through a video game, usually. Um, and usually when we see that or we see high trends of that, normally we kind of see that as, is the child trying to escape from reality, and is online right now a safer place for them to feel accepted? So that's what we hear from parents, and I'll pass the youth part over to Sundis and she'll continue that part for you.
Yeah, so that's what we typically hear from parents. But when we get the chance to talk to the youth that do come to our clinic for sessions when they are experiencing bullying, some of the things that we hear from them is that it doesn't feel safe to go to school, or school doesn't feel safe. Sometimes they'll say like the teachers or the adults, the staff that are there, are not doing anything about the situation, are not addressing bullying in any way. Sometimes the kids are worried that their parents are overreacting and they're making the situation worse. They're fighting with the teachers, or they're blaming the kid, whatever that might look like. We also hear from young people that they don't want the school resource officer, or like the principal, assistant principal, any like authority figures to get involved. It could be for like, maybe they're scared about what might happen, or it might just be that it's embarrassing, right? And then that kind of ties in with that last one, is sometimes kids don't want the involvement or awareness from their other peers, like their friends, their classmates. They don't really want them to know what's going on, because again, it could be embarrassing. It could make the situation worse. It could make them see their classmate as a little bit different, and kids don't want to experience that. It's not a great thing to go through. Yeah, so now we'll just kind of go into another discussion. We want to hear from you guys.
In this discussion, again, please do leave your responses in the chat and I will read them out loud. But 2 questions, like, what are some warning signs that you think your own kid might be the bully? And what are some warning signs that you might suspect that your own kid might be behaving like one, like behaving like a bully? So we got the bully and the bullied. So what are some warning signs you guys may have had personal experience with, or maybe have seen signs in your own kiddos, or maybe in like a relative or a friends of friends? We would like to kind of know your thoughts on that. So feel free to throw that into the comments and I'll read them out loud. Yeah, I see one comment here. When kids do diss each other but tell their parents it's an inside joke. That's a very common one. We tend to hear that a lot from a lot of youths that we work and also spoke with. A child becomes withdrawn, of course. It works on both ends as well. But yeah, like as the comments keep coming, like I can read out loud like what some of the warning signs that we have written down, just to kind of let you guys know. But some warning signs that we kind of figured that we wanted to share, that your child might be bullied, so is the victim. You'll see signs of maybe problems with concentrating, so memory issues. They can't recall certain information, changes in appetite, feeling sad, empty, hopeless, or feeling worthless. Maybe loss of interest in the things that they used to enjoy, excessive worry. They may get irritable really quick or they're really restless. You'll see changes in their sleep patterns and sleep habits, maybe even seeing more angry outbursts. Sometimes we see kids not wanting to be around other people or take part in activities anymore, hearing or seeing things that other people don't. That's a more of an extreme case, but it can happen. Sometimes kids can go through extreme panic, right? Like we don't really know what their triggers are, especially if we don't know what's happening. So there could be things in the environment that could set them off because the trigger in the environment could remind them of the bully. Um, and of course, mood swings and possibly, and this is a big one to kind of watch out for, changes in how they dress. So if you know that your kid is the type who likes to wear a lot of dresses or maybe wears a lot of t-shirts and shorts, but suddenly they're wearing a lot of sweats, a lot of long sleeves, just covering up a lot more than usual, there could be a sign that there may be some injuries going on if it's like a physical bullying type of behavior that's happening, or maybe in a way, the bullying has caused severe mental health struggles that they may be engaging in self harm. So, just something to kind of think about. And I do see in the comments, one more has mentioned a child becomes more emotional and more pessimistic or negative, which is very, very true. So, that was some warning signs for a child who might be bullied. But so some warning signs that we have also written down for a child who might be behaving like one, so behaving like a bully. Um, of course, it could be like the ones I've listed, but the more common ones are they may say things or talk about how they're obsessed with fitting in. They may have previous experiences with anger already, so you see more anger outburst. A tendency towards violence, a tendency towards putting people down. So they engage in a lot of either even like nonverbals or even verbal gestures that suggests is that, they're putting people down, and reoccurring problem behaviors. So despite it being tackled every single time, you see the behaviors coming back up over and over again, and not just in one setting, but across different settings. So at school, at home, in the community, maybe it's in the extracurricular activities that they're in. So just seeing that pattern being transferred across different settings.
Okay. The last piece like that we really wanted to talk about before we get into like what should you guys do in these situations, right, is the identity piece, right? Adolescents, or when as soon as a young person like hits puberty, that's the time when they're most likely starting to build their own identity. They're figuring out who they are. and how others see them. And the funny thing is, they actually learn from observing and interacting with other people around them. And while a young person, a teenager, would focus mostly on what their peers are doing, what they're actually doing is they're looking at the adults in their life, to kind of help them navigate like any stressful situations or how they would respond in certain situations. So essentially, the adults becomes the role model, and your child is most likely, without really acknowledging it or knowing or realizing what they're doing, they're kind of looking to you, to role model and deal with stressors in their life. um, do you might be asking yourself, you might want to start, in this case, like considering, like, when I'm angry, does my child see me like give someone the silent treatment, or do they see me yell, or is it, do I take space and I address the situation later, right? Those are all responses that, and your response, like following that conflict, right? Those are all ways that your child is going to start picking up on how to deal with bullies or other stressful situations. And another piece of this too is that, building self-identity, is actually a really hard task when a young person is being bullied or doesn't feel safe to express who they are or what they're about, how they grew up, right? When a young person is being bullied, they risk developing a low self-esteem, low self-worth, low confidence, which makes it harder to understand who they are. And because of this, they might feel more isolated. They might turn to peer groups, that accept them for the way that they are, or they might engage in behaviors that end up putting them at risk, whether that's, self-harm, substance abuse, whatever that might look like. And sometimes, like, unfortunately, like with the way that kids build their identity, they might begin to connect their own identity to unhealthy peers or unsafe behaviors, right? So they might start having a negative, I guess, self-identity. They might see themselves as a bad person, or they might see themselves as someone who has mental health challenges, or whatever the situation might be for each kid, right? And so, with all that being said, it's a lot of it is very, very overwhelming for parents to hear, right? We talked about different types of bullying. We talked about the dangers of technology and cyberbullying, identity formation. Like, it can be very overwhelming for parents to hear that, especially if they know that their kid is going through something at school or in their life, right? So the question comes down to, like, what should parents do? And so what we've done is we've tried to compile our favorite strategies to kind of pass off to you guys, in the hopes that, if that does come up in your family, it's something that you have the tools to address. So we'll start with parent tips about identity. This one's important, just because we just talked about identity, right? Like, this is, if your children are in junior high or high school, this is when they start building that identity. That's the part of their brain that's developing right now. What we encourage parents to do is to consider how they encourage or role model positive behaviors. So, communicating in a healthy way, using assertive communication instead of passive aggressive or aggressive, ways of talking to not just their child, but other people in their lives, right? Like their spouse or other siblings or other relatives, friends. Consider how your interactions might be a way for, um, a way for parents to see you, sorry, for your child to see you and learn from what you're doing, right? Then also be mindful about how you talk about your child and how that might impact their self-identity. Are you making comments about, negative comments about who they are? Or are you kind of making positive comments, that kind of raise their self-esteem? You know, Sometimes, parent, like, and this is something that comes up quite a bit with our crisis line, right? We find that parents, sometimes we'll say things like, my child is struggling with their mental health, or my kid has a problem. um, those negative, I guess, enforcements of labels to identity, it kind of ends up impacting your child and how they see themselves, right? Because, well, if it, like it, I think I mentioned at the beginning, like, parents, you guys know your child best, right? If you see this, like, if you see this in your child and you reflect that back to them, not only will your child start to believe that, but coincidentally, the other people in your life will also start to believe that. So their siblings might also start to see them that way. Your spouse might see them that way. Their grandparents, their aunts, uncles, right? Um, and that's kind of what we want to push away from. What we want to do is we want to be able to offer praise and highlight strengths when that's appropriate. We want a higher chance of kids um, identifying themselves as someone who's good at something, or tries hard, puts in good effort, stays calm in a situation. Those are all things that build a, like, the healthy building blocks for identity development. And and yeah, being aware of how everyone interacts with your life really does help a kid build their own identity and understand who they are.
Another point we wanted to kind of highlight is not only, of course, are we minding like how we're talking to our kids, because again, they are developing their identity at that point, but another key factor is building and creating a safe environment. And building a safe environment doesn't just look like, oh, like let's keep the room clean or let's have all their gadgets and things that they love in the room. It's way more than that. If you think about it, creating an emotional safe space is also very important. Creating a creating a very cultural sensitive space, and also a space where culture can be talked about in a very respectful way, can promote safety as well. It's not just, again, cultural, but also social as well. Social, and where they're able to continue to do daily life activities, so their day-to-day routines, but being able to do it in a way where they're not being judged. What I mean by that is, it's very common. We all have our own personal values and beliefs, and within our own family dynamics, we do come with our own cultures. But within our own cultures, sometimes we may we may find ourselves saying something else about, whether it's negative or positive, about somebody else's culture. We do live in Canada, and being in this country, like, everybody is very multicultural. We all come from different backgrounds. So in this home environment, how are we fostering safe conversations relating to other people's culture in a positive way? Because again, like, a lot of times bullying comes from a form of, like, imbalance of power, and that power can be abused, and it can be used in many different ways. And oftentimes, um, a lot of kids might use a lot of racist stuff, like say a lot of racist stuff. So how do you foster that safe environment where we're also not only teaching us, like, each other, how to be emotionally safe with each other, but also culturally safe? um, the next part we wanted to also highlight is offering constructive feedback. And I'm not saying this is the intent of any adult, but sometimes we may fall into the thought process of, we care so much about our kids, we want the best for them, and something had happened and we just worry. And sometimes comments like, you always make bad decisions, I told you not to do that. We know we say this because we care, we worry, and we're concerned. But when we say these things to our kids, they're not seeing it from our point of view. What they're actually hearing is, I just made a bad choice. My mom told me not to do this and I did it. I messed up. So it's not really offering any constructive feedback on how they could have went about the situation differently or in a healthier manner. If anything, it does cause a narrative where they are feeling shameful about their own decisions. So there's not much teaching. It feels more like shameful commenting. So think about the comments that you're making towards your kids, or maybe to somebody else, and think about, is that something that you want your kids to hear, or can your kids learn from that whole statement you just made? Another thing we wanted to highlight is listen and gather information. This one is especially hard sometimes, especially like if you have seen a situation and you know who is right and who is wrong, especially if you know your kid is probably like wrong in the situation, you want to correct them right away. But it's important to actually give them that space, give the kids the space to talk about how they felt in that situation from their own perspective, from their own lens, from their own eyes. What happened to them? Because that's important. Because if they can't talk about how they feel, how can you trust them to bring up their own feelings in future conversations? So, listening and gathering information, even though the information may sound wrong or not correct to you, you got to bite your tongue and give them that space to just talk about it. Um, and one last thing we wanted to kind of highlight is do not encourage any retaliation. Again, like I know cultural wise, like maybe there is some component where like some parents may encourage it. Like I'm not too sure, but retaliation shouldn't be encouraged in ways where, it could make the situation even worse. Um, so just think about that piece because I do know some parents, I know some parents will say things like, well, if my kid is getting beaten, like I would want them to fight back. And again, I'm not going to tell parents what to do, but just take in mind on what you're recommending to your own kids when you say things like that. And there should be some sort of context that should be kept in place. So just something to kind of think about.
Okay. So if we're able to get to that place, where you have created a safe environment at home, your child is telling you, is does feel safe with you, and tells you, I'm being bullied. Like, what do you as a parent do next, right? And I think the typical response that we often hear from parents is like, we felt mad. How dare somebody hurt my child? What do I do about it? How do I react? And sometimes, you know, that's that's the reaction that your child might worry would happen, right? And what we recommend, based off of what we've seen like works with our families, right, is to, very a lot easier said than done, but to stay cool, calm, and collected, right? To take a breath before you address the situation, right? Take into consideration, like, how am I feeling right now? How does my body language look like? Do I look like I'm about to yell at someone, or do I want to fight with someone, right? What's going on in my brain? Am I feeling ready to have this conversation? Do I need a minute before I give a good response, right? Those are all things that you should be considering if this subject matter does come up. Because again, we don't want to push our kids away from being open with us and telling us what's going on. Thank your child for being honest, for sharing what they've gone through, and then ask more questions, like Savannah said, like, gather more information. um, you don't have to put any judgments on it. You're just getting the facts from your kid's point of view, right? um, well, like, you know whether like a timeline is helpful, or why they felt that way, how they felt in those situations. Those are kinds of things that we should focus on, and not so much like, oh, like, this is what we have to do, right? You're kind of slowing down that time. You want to get as much information from your kid. You want to validate as much um, emotions as you can from what your child has told you, right? And then you also let them know that they're not in trouble, that you are on their side. You're trying to support them. You're there to support them. um, those are all things, like, essentially, we don't want to get to a point where we feel angry, and we overreact, and we make the situation worse by causing a conflict with our child, or pushing them away from wanting to share more, right? So that's kind of that. And then I guess the last piece we'll go into is collaborating.
Yeah, and like with our last piece here, collaborating is pretty self-explanatory here. Like what we always preach here at Woods Homes is when we do work together with a client or a child, we don't just make decisions for them, we make decisions together. We want to work together with the client and not without the client. So the biggest thing is if your kid does come to you, feels safe enough, and talks to you about what's going on at school, their own situation, I would always recommend, and I think same thing with Sunda's, any crisis counselor would say, plan together with your kids on how you want to tackle this situation together. Get an idea of what maybe they have already got in their minds. Like maybe they do want to talk to a teacher, but they haven't had the courage, and maybe they just need your support as a parent to be there with them to talk about the situation. And taking that in mind, I do understand that there are some situations that can come up where safety needs to be addressed right away, where the parents will have to make a decision without the kids' input. That's fine. But the important message behind that is the follow-up conversation. So being as transparent as you can with your child to teach them, like in that moment, like, I know it's very frustrating that, I had to go talk to your teacher right away about this situation, but I did it because this situation couldn't wait a second and your safety was jeopardized. But the important thing is we need to have a conversation about it so that I can understand how you're feeling. And I want you to know how I felt. And maybe we can work on a plan on how we can work together as a parent and a child to get through this situation again or in the future. It's just always good to have that trust being built. The foundation of having trust really comes with a good relationship. So just being sure to always engage with your child, have those honest conversations. Again, when you do end up bringing these tough conversations together with the school, having these meetings or whatnot, like making sure that, like, as a parent, you're not getting in your feels, being upset, and then storming into maybe the classroom or the principal's office. And I'm not, again, saying like this is something that parents do, but it can happen to certain parents because they're so protective of their kids. They love their kids. But we have to be mindful that when we do that, we may unintentionally cause a scene, and that could actually further damage the relationship that you have with your child and the trust. And the child might not want to come to you again, knowing that this is how you're going to react and to behave. So always try to maybe give the school a call, give the teachers a heads up, maybe email, set up a meeting where things could be done in a confidential manner where other kids won't know what's going on, just so that the student who is taking action about their bullying situation and the parents too can feel safe to do so. And one other thing is we always recommend, like, let the school collaborate together with the parents. Don't just decide that you're going to deal with this situation yourself, because 9 out of 10 times when you try to deal with this outside of school, maybe it'll work out, but maybe it won't. And that will have lasting effects between the kid and the other kid in school happening behind closed doors, and we won't even know about it. So it's always good to get the school involved, let them know what's going on, so that all adults have their eyes on the kids to ensure that safety is checked off. So that's what we got for collaboration. And we'll be moving on to the Q&A section now. So thank you for listening to us here. I think for this part, Sindus and I, because we're sitting in the same room and there's going to be a feedback if we unmute our mics, I think we'll just kind of read the questions. Like, I'll read the questions out loud, and maybe like we'll alternate our mics here and there to answer. So if there's going to be a pause in between, it's because we're switching mics. But yeah, like, the floor is your guys' if you guys have any questions.
And I think just adding to, like, if you guys, have questions about maybe later about our presentation, or feel like you need more support, maybe someone who's being bullied, whether it's your own child or a family friend or whatever, feel free to, like, give us a call here at Eastside Community Mental Health Services. So that's our number there on the screen. That anyone that answers that phone line is a crisis counselor like myself and Savannah, and we would be, like, more than happy to support you guys with whatever questions or inquiries that you guys have. It's always, our phone line's always open, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week. So we're here to hear you guys.
Thank you very much, ladies. This is Doug Lamb speaking. Mr. Poirier logged in as me to start this off. So thank you very much. Sandus, Savannah, I was on the email chains with you, with our council, to set all this up. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, Mr. Poirier stepped away. I don't recall if he's started the recording and if I have the capability to stop it. So what I figured was that I would keep this as a recording for council's. Oh, you're back?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Do you have the ability to stop the recording?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then Sonda Silvana, I've been able to